going on, everybody? Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to you, wherever you may be. So today we're going to be doing an oil change and a new oil pan gasket on a 2009 Dodge Avenger 2.7 liter engine. So this is the setup for the engine, just in case you guys have this type of engine setup. 2.7 liter, dual overhead camshaft. All right. Here's our oil, Mobil 1, filter, new filter, the new oil pan. So step one, first step you're gonna do, loosen up your lug nuts, jack the car up, take the tire off. You see our lug nuts over here. Here's all our tools, sockets, some wrenches, scraper, you know, keep the pan clean, flashlight, torque wrench, some more tools. All right, step two, move this side cover here, right underneath the wheel well. So you come down here, we're gonna remove this side cover here, just so we can have more access to everything we need to get to. Timing cover, a few other bolts and stuff like that. All right, so we got the first cover off. Now we're gonna remove the second cover. In order to get to the second cover, you gotta remove the first cover first. So once you move the first fender cover, you can have access to the second. And you gotta remove one of the little clips here, and then you just remove this bolt here. And I think there's one more bolt that sits right up inside of here. Right behind here is real smooth. That bolt right there, you gotta take that one off too. All right, we got our cover removed. The reason why, there's two bolts here that's attached to the oil pan. That bolt there, and that bolt right there. Once again, there's two bolts attached to the oil pan. They are attached to your timing cover. That bolt right there. That bolt right there. All right. You gotta remove those two bolts in order to drop this oil pan down. So the next step we're gonna do is drain the oil. Step we're going to do is remove the oil filter. All right, so the next step we're going to do is start to remove our oil pan dipstick. This bolt looks a little rusty, so we're going to spray a little bit of WD-40 on here. Try to help that bolt out a little bit. Let that soak up a little bit. While we're letting that soak, we're gonna go down to the bottom and start taking off our oil pan bolts. So now we got the oil drained out, oil filter removed, we're gonna attempt to start removing our bolts. Try to take all of our bolts off to drop this thing down. Don't forget to take the bolt off your compressor here. You gotta take that off too. And drop this down so we can get access to this plate. You gotta get access to this cover plate. There's a cover plate up in there. So we gotta get access to that plate. In order to get access to that cover plate, we gotta drop this down. So that'll be our next step, dropping this down to get access. 3 bolts back there. 1, 2, 3, 4 actually. 1, 2, 3, 4. So those 1, 2, 3, and 4, those bolts gotta come off. And then these bolts up here. Trying to make sure I got the angle right for you guys. These bolts up here gotta come off. All right, that's our next step. So our next step is to drop this frame, to give ourselves access to that plate right there. All right, so the next thing we're gonna do is loosen up this bolt here. All right, so pretty much we got to get this bolt off of the transmission mount, and then we got to take these 2 bolts down in order for this to drop down to get access to this little cover plate we're trying to get to. So we WD-40'd up both sides. Now we're going to start to try to loosen up. 15mm wrench on here, and we're going to start working our bolt off. It's kind of tight, so we're just going to keep the processes going back and forth. Trying to make sure I'm loosening it, not tightening. All right, so we're aiming right here. We're at the edge here to see if our bolt is becoming tight or loose. So we're gonna check. We wanna see if this starts to come out farther. Let's see. So we took that off. All right, we'll break these 2 bolts open to see what happens. Same thing. Lefty loosey, righty tighty. These, they probably haven't been loosened since the car been built. Grab our best friend here, Mr. WD. Spray some right up inside of there. We had to loosen up this front of the bumper a little bit. We're gonna see what happens once we take these bolts all the way out. It's supposed to drop. It's supposed to drop down. Supposed to. We're gonna see if that actually does happen or not. Little rust. Little rust. This hasn't been done since the car's been manufactured, I guarantee you. This is the original oil pan. I don't see anything move. We're going for these 3 bolts back here now. No animation. Technical difficulty there. Leave it there. Thank you, sir. One, 2, 3. Alright, we're gonna go for this one next. This is gonna fall probably right on my face, but that's alright. This bolt is too easy. Way too easy. The only one that's giving me the most resistance is this one right here. So we're gonna come down. I gotta make sure I keep these bolts in order the way they came out as well. So we got 1, 2, 3, 4. These 4 bolts. When I drop this out, we're gonna put these 4 bolts back in here so we don't get anything mixed up in our work process. All right, so we got the lower cross member out. Next, we're gonna go for the bracket that's on the oil pan. There's another bracket we gotta get to. So all that it says, you just gotta remove this pin, and this cross member is supposed to fall straight down, but that's false. You gotta remove the pin, loosen up the first 2 bolts in the front, and then loosen up the 3 here in the middle, and then the last bolt in the back in order to get this to drop down. We're gonna try to get this bracket right here off there. So I'm gonna just get us a shot and see what happens here. But this is supposed to be the bracket. This bracket is connected to our oil pan. So we're gonna try to get this out of here. I'm gonna start with these 3 bolts here up top and see what happens. First, I'm gonna start with the middle. We got our labels already made up for these, so we should be good. Just wanna give this a shot, see what happens. Going for bolt number 2. Replace and removal. All right, we're going for bolt number 3. This is supposed to be the bracket, so let's see what happens here. All right, this is bolt number 3. Dry. All right, so now we're about to take off this bracket. There's bolts you got to loosen up, 1, 2, and 3 here, and then there's 1 up here, 1, 2, 3, 4. So 4 at the bottom, 3 at the top, and the bracket should start to come down. So this is a transmission bracket, excuse me. This is a bracket that goes between the transmission and the oil pan. Bracket comes down. Now you can see the transmission, our flywheel plate is right there. So we got to take those bolts out in order to drop this bracket down. And now you see you got a little bit of access to see all this here. Bracket that we removed also, that's attached to the oil pan. As you can see, we're going to clean this up too. Everything's going to get cleaned up and nicely shined up once we're done. But that's the bracket you got to take off of the oil pan in order to have access to the other bolts to the oil pan. There's 2 bolts right there that you got to remove once that plate comes down. These 2 bolts are attached to your oil pan and they're really small. 10mm socket to get those 2 bolts off. The next thing we're going to do is work our way around removing all the bolts onto our oil pan off and see what happens. So the next bolt we got to remove is this bolt right here going to our AC compressor, which is attached to our oil pan. So this bolt right here, we're gonna remove that bolt. All right, so we removed the dipstick tube. Now we're gonna try to get this thing to come down a little bit. Let's see if we can get this to drop down. There we go. So you gotta remove the dipstick tube. If not, you're not gonna have enough clearance to drop this pan down. So now that I've dropped this pan down, I wanna see if I have enough clearance just to pull it out. Am I getting stuck? I'm getting stuck. Maybe I don't have enough clearance. I might have been wrong. Come down. I see. Yep, this pan's here. loosened up bolts down here on the exhaust. What I plan on doing now is I gotta get this to move a little bit in order to get access to this oil pan. We don't have that much clearance. Even with the dipstick tube out, still getting stuck. Which I thought I wouldn't be, but I am. Still getting stuck up a little bit here. So, what I plan on doing now is giving myself a little clearance by disconnecting our catalytic converter and letting this drop down. And when I drop down the catalytic converter, I should have clearance from the top since this didn't do anything. I think there's 6 bolts up there. We disconnect up top, remove the heat shield, drop this down. We should have clearance to be able to pull this out. So I'm working on that now. I'm disconnecting the bolts up top from the catalytic converter.